Hey, let me ask you something, Truth Seekers. Do you remember back in the day when the pig man, I haven't talked about the pig man too much, Limbaugh, because he belongs to a different era. But remember when the pig man said that 13-year-old Chelsea Clinton, Bill and Hillary Clinton's daughter, this is way back in the 90s, that Chelsea Clinton was their family dog? Remember that? And do you remember John McCain's joke when he said, do you know why Chelsea Clinton is so ugly? Because Janet Reno is her father. Remember that horse shit? Huh? Which brings me to a comment that Stanford law professor Pamela Karlan made yesterday in her testimony, or was it the day before, when she said she was trying to show the difference between a real despot, a dictator like Trump, and say a king. Trump is not a king, never would be, except the king of shit. But Pamela Karlan said, quote, while the president can name his son Barron, he can't make him a baron. Right? That's it. But I've said before, in these times, with these dumb fucked Republicans, these incipient Nazis waiting to jump on anything, you can't use humor. You can't use irony. You can't use metaphor. You can't speak in conditional terms on any level. These sons of bitches with their Christian horse shit, they look at everything through black and white. Ooh, ooh, ooh! Did you hear she said something about Barron Trump? Well, the whole impeachment thing ought to collapse now. Alyssa Rosenberg, Washington Post. Let us begin with the abundantly obvious, since apparently we need to do that these days. It was a bad joke, an incredibly boneheaded strategy. I disagree, Ms. Rosenberg. There was no fucking strategy. The law professor was simply making a point and happened to use dumb fuck's idiot son to make her point. Alyssa Rosenberg says there are more direct ways to say that, even if President Trump doesn't recognize them. There are limits on his power. There are definitely jokes to make about the president's taste for the imperial that don't require contorting the spelling of his youngest child's name. Oh, my God. You know why Chelsea Clinton is so ugly? Because Janet Reno is her father. That's out of the mouth of the great Vietnam War hero, now dead, John McCain. If her aim, Professor Karlan's aim, was to give these Republican swine ammunition to use against the entire misconduct and criminal activity of this fucking Trump, she succeeded. That wasn't her intent. She was making a throwaway comment, trying to make a point, using the name Barron and the royal title, or whatever it is, Barron. One with a capital B and 2 R's, the other with a small b and 1 R. So Professor Karlan apologized, sort of. She said, quote, it was wrong of me to do that. I wish the president would apologize, obviously, for the things that he's done that are wrong, but I do regret having said that, end quote. Now, the pundits are saying that the apology from Professor Karlan was too lukewarm. What the fuck? This is madness. And Alyssa Rosenberg writes, and because we live in an era when everything has to be as stupid and mendacious as possible, the Trump administration jumped all over the opportunity that Professor Karlan inadvertently innocently gave them. Rosenberg points out the obvious. The episode is simultaneously so ephemeral as to be barely worth comment. I mean, what the fuck? It's just... And a perfect example of how political combatants collude to turn little tiny things into muddy, bloody battlefields. No, just Republicans. It might have been one thing if Melania Trump, and her alone, spoke up in defense, Ms. Rosenberg writes, of her son's right not to be invoked in an investigation of his father. The First Lady's efforts to keep her son out of the public eye have been consistent and correct. If she got a little defensive about a swipe at her child's name, so what? But what was really toxic and deliberately misleading and encrusted with more bullshit than you'll find outside a cow pasture was the way the Republican political operatives rushed in en masse to recast Professor Karlan's comment as an attack on a child. This from a fucking administration that's cutting millions of people off of food stamps, including 1 million children who will no longer get school lunches? Yes. And it was Republican pieces of shit like this Kevin McCarthy. Did you see that fucker today, this morning on television? Oh my God. They made Barron Trump the subject of the story. They did it. Professor Karlan's subject was Daddy Trump, the fucking gangster, the incipient dictator. And that was the point she was trying to make. Stephanie Grisham, that silly bitch, that invisible haint, that phantom who is supposed to be the press secretary of this corrupt administration, she recently defended Trump's right to call people human scum. Fuck you, Stephanie. You double-dealing, two-faced, goddamn Christian Republican, you. She defends Trump's right to call people human scum. And then she clucked, Professor Karlan uses a teenage boy who had nothing to do with this joke of a hearing and deserves privacy and use him as a punchline. You nasty-ass woman, you. And then Pence, the uber-Christian, Mike Pence, that filthy dog, that filthy bastard, sick of insulting dogs. He went even further, Pence did. He suggested that Professor Karlan and House Democrats had conspired to use Barron Trump to, quote, justify their partisan impeachment, end quote, because apparently no words mean anything anymore. You rotten fucker, Mike Pence, you have taken the words of the person you call your savior, you fucking hypocrite, and you have turned those words into shit. So don't stand there, Mike Pence, and say, well, apparently words don't mean anything anymore. Go read your fucking Bible. Read your Bible, you asshole. God, these people. And what about her husband's nasty fucking remark about Greta Thunberg? The also 13, 14, 15, the young teenager who's trying to warn the world about what the adults on this planet don't seem to give a fuck about. And Trump's snotty remarks about her. So fuck you, Melania. Fuck you, Donald Trump. And fuck you, Mike Pence. And all of you people. You're the ones who do this. Liberals, Democrats, we don't. we react. You goddamn scum. Of course you're going to get a reaction. You'll get a reaction from me, as people who subscribe to this podcast know. Alyssa Rosenberg then writes this: inflating a single irrelevant line of testimony until it's the size of a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade float is a conscious decision to obscure the rest of the impeachment proceedings rather than mount an actual defense against what this pig son of a bitch Trump is being charged with. They have no defense. So they seize on a throwaway line, an example of Trump's insidious fucking insanity and his desire to be Big Brother or the King or Hitler. They seize on what the professor said, and that becomes the message of the day. Oh, look what they did to poor little Barron Trump. Alyssa Rosenberg writes, the people who fall for this flagrant obfuscation and who ignore the flabbergasting hypocrisy and ignorance of history it takes to advance this mock outrage are choosing not to think. And she adds that I'm to blame, too, for choosing to write this column because I can't quite resist the temptation to point out how ridiculous this is, and then therefore to walk into the trap that all these Republicans have set. Grisham, the Invisible's press secretary, tweeted, "What is being done to this country is no laughing matter." She's wrong. The joke is that we could be different or better or more consistent and fair, less susceptible to debate, but we've all decided to behave like this instead. Well, I appreciate what Alyssa Rosenberg writes. This is where I part company with these very talented, very erudite, very informed writers for the Post and the Times and whatever other publication, and the commentators who are constantly bringing up the fact that, and it is a fact, that the country is riven right now, that people are screaming at each other across the divide. Okay. But then to suggest that somehow those of us on the so-called left of the divide are responsible because we keep it going, to me, is utter, absolute, mountainous bullshit. When the fuck did liberals or left-wingers start jamming Christianity up everybody's ass and telling people, you're going to fucking burn in hell if you don't... When did liberals start shoving their heads and their hands up into a woman's reproductive organs and saying, hey, that's our territory? When the fuck have liberals decided to cross-check voting rolls and eliminate millions of people from the voting rolls so the dirty son of a bitches could win these fraudulent elections? And when did a Democrat or a liberal ever turn to this fucking Nazi in Moscow, Putin, and say, hey, come and help me beat the bitch? When? Never. And who was it? Liberals or Republicans? Progressives or conservatives who decided to make torture an official policy of the U.S. government? Who the fuck did that? What administration is saying to hundreds of thousands of people, fuck you, you don't get food stamps anymore because we've decided you're not entitled? Who does that? Is that liberal? Is that a progressive? Who is it that pisses and shits all over the parents of a young man who died defending this fucking country because he happened to be Muslim? Who does that? So Alyssa Rosenberg and all you writers, all you opinion writers, go fuck yourself if you continue to make it sound like there's some equivalence. There is not, and there never has been. Ever. I mean, I could go on and on. I could spend the whole fucking podcast here. Who is it that wants to keep jamming in the face of black people these fucking traitorous scum, these statues of these Confederate traitors who tried to rip the country apart and cost 800,000 Americans their lives? Who did that? Who insisted on owning other people? Who did that? Jesus fucking Christ. So every time I read one of these columns that I would otherwise agree with, until I get into the column, like Alyssa's column, and she gets to the point where, I'm part of the problem too, she writes, because I'm writing about it. Isn't that how a totalitarian state thrives? You get people who would otherwise criticize the shit out of this stuff. You get them to remain silent so that they don't become, quote, part of the problem. If we scream in resistance, we're part of the problem. Fuck you, whoever said that. I can remember 35 goddamn years ago when the pig man, Rush Limbaugh, came on the air, that drug-addled, crazy fucker Rush Limbaugh. And I listened to him for a couple of days. I was working a radio station here in Atlanta, and he was on a competing station, and I couldn't fucking believe my ears. Oh, my God, is this guy going to cause trouble? And the miserable piece of shit, he sends his housekeeper out to score street drugs for him. And yet the Republicans in this country still fucking listen to this piece of shit. And then you have Sean Hannity. Oh my God. Is there a stupider man on earth than Sean Hannity? Only one. Trump. So to writers on the left or the right, to these Republican spokespeople in the Congress, Kevin McCarthy, the rest of you pricks, go fuck yourself. You want this shit to stop? Then get rid of this dirty son of a bitch that stole the election with the help of Russians. Get him out of there. And have him take his dog, Mike Pence, with him. Then let's talk. You miserable bastards. Why is Chelsea Clinton so ugly? 'Cause Janet Reno is her father. That's from the war hero, by the way. The same guy who bombed and strafed and murdered Vietnamese civilians. Jesus fucking Christ. It's just... Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. You have your choice. You can listen to the ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.